I'm your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 129 of the Future Template Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carolyn Solo, PhD, LCSW. After I've done a couple of more businessy, entrepreneur life type episodes, I thought I'd change things up a bit with a more clinical episode. Today, I want to talk a little bit, just very basic intro, about a topic that can feel pretty scary, which is working with perpetrator interjects or perpetrator parts for dissociative clients. This is a misunderstood topic for sure, and one that can feel very overwhelming to therapists. So I'm going to talk about what exactly a perpetrator interject is, why it's important to work with them, why this might come up in an intensive, and how to work with them safely and compassionately. So let's go. First of all, I think it's important to talk about perpetrator interjects on an intensives podcast because intensives can be a clinical approach that can bring out dissociated parts in ways that 50-minute sessions do not. So you may have a client in your office for 5+ hours in a day and you're doing really deep parts work and bam, a perpetrator interject comes out swinging and maybe you weren't even aware of the extent of a client's dissociation before the session, but now you've got a really, might even feel scary part in front of you, okay? You may also have a client who you know has a dissociative disorder, and so you want to be prepared for what could happen in an intensive with them, right? Working with perpetrator interjects is a really vital step to get to a place with a dissociative client where you can actually process traumatic memories effectively. It's likely going to be impossible to make substantial progress processing with this, with someone with a dissociative disorder or any kind of significant dissociation, whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary structural dissociation. You need to work with the perpetrator interject if you're going to get to any kind of effective trauma processing. If you don't work with the perpetrator interject, that's just going to shut processing down completely. If you try it without having them on board first, they interject. The person might get really flooded or they might just sort of shut down entirely. End quote, if all in quotes, you do during an intensive with a dissociative client is work with their parts, that is a huge achievement and an incredibly worthwhile use of time, okay? Even if you never get to anything even resembling phase 4, right? Accessing parts, orienting some of them to present time, helping them feel safe in relationship with you, creating containers and safe places for different parts, letting parts tell you their stories that maybe no one else has ever heard. That's hugely significant in a client's healing. And all of that is a form of trauma processing as well. And part of that entire process of all these parts is these perpetrator interjects. So what even are perpetrator interjects? Well, introject is a relatively common psychology term. You probably learned it in grad school. But if you need a little refresher, good old Wikipedia says that introjection is the unconscious adoption of the thoughts, memories, or personality traits of others. It occurs as a normal part of development, such as a child taking on parental values and attitudes. So notice there it's a very neutral description of what introjection is. Introjection can function as a defense mechanism, and it is in fact one of Freud's identified defense mechanisms. Introjection is the idea of sort of swallowing, taking in, internalizing external voices and standards, which can shape an individual's identity, relationship patterns, how they view themselves, and certainly kind of self-criticism is a common way that we internalize that voice. So in some cases, an introject can be relatively benign. We could have many, introjected voices, right? I heard Dr. Sandra Paulson, I know I talk about her a lot, tell a story in a training. I believe in her looking through the eyes of trauma and dissociation training about how whenever she leaves her socks on the floor, forgets to pick them up, she hears the voice of her mother saying, "You need to pick up your socks," right? That's an introject. But for people who have been severely traumatized by attachment figures, and when I say severely traumatized, I also mean neglect. Although certainly we have, many dissociated clients who were really brutally victimized physically, sexually, not just emotionally, by attachment figures. And so those introjects can become menacing and terrifying, right? Internal representations of cruel abusers, even, torturers, like some, I'm sure maybe not all of you have worked with clients that have had those experiences, but I certainly have. And so those introjects can be really scary. And sometimes an introject can be both, right? An attachment figure like a parent who was also a terrifying abuser. And that's complex because most of the time, I can't say all the time because I don't know, but certainly anytime I have worked with someone, children will have some attachment to their primary caregiver and will have loyalty to them, even if they are incredibly abusive, because when we're children and we're helpless, we need to trust to some degree that our primary attachment figures are caring for us, even if we have lots of evidence to the contrary, right? It's very hard to find a child who thinks their parents are 100% evil and they have no attachment to them whatsoever, right? Certainly not a child. And then so there's often these childlike parts within an adult that still maintain that attachment to the perpetrator, and sometimes even adult parts too, right? Right. So, other parts of the individual can have that loyalty, even if that perpetrator presents as terrifying. And when I say terrifying, I mean yelling, I mean swearing, I mean threatening, I mean scary. Like their voice can change. They can sound really menacing. They can like look at you with like a really, really like menacing, like trying to make you afraid, right? Because that's how they treat the parts inside, right? And it can be scary. It has been scary to me the times that I have encountered this and with clients. And so I highly recommend consultation with someone who specializes in dissociation if you're doing this work. More than, a podcast episode can teach you about this, right? I mean, this is really heavy and it's a lot to hold. Certainly the subject matter itself is going to be really intense, and it can feel like a lot if you have your client switch to a part of self that all of a sudden is yelling at you in your office and you've never encountered them being like that with you before, and their voices change. Like it's really overwhelming. So support is vital, and you can learn how to tolerate it and work with it. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. What do you actually do? But it's a lot, and so I don't want to downplay that at all. Like these are sessions that stick with you and can really weigh on you. So it's really important to have support. So how do you work with perpetrator introjects and why? I again will recommend Dr. Sandra Paulson's work, Looking Through the Eyes of Trauma and Dissociation, and When There Are No Words. She has books and trainings by each of those names for lots and lots of detail. Like she really goes into this in a lot of depth. But in summary, here's a couple of things just to kind of get you thinking. Dr. Paulson and most people who work with very, very dissociative clients recommend working with perpetrator interjects as soon as you can, right? And then it's absolutely essential to get the perpetrator interject on board with you before trying any kind of phase 4 processing. If the perpetrator interject is not on board with processing targets, the client's going to become flooded. They're going to have flashbacks. They might shut down completely. The perpetrator interject is protecting. It's a protective part and is blocking access to the memory, right? They are playing a protective role. And something else to know is that often a perpetrator interject, once they kind of release some of that perpetrator energy, turns out to be actually a young child part that has taken on these attributes to like be scary and be bigger than life so that they don't get hurt again. That's sort of the idea behind what a perpetrator introject is. They're not going to seem like a child at first. They often are going to seem like a monster. They might seem like a big dark cloud. They might be like something menacing, but like they might actually reveal themselves to be a child once you've worked with them and they've kind of released some of this intensity that they hold. Just so know that as well, because that can help us have a little bit more compassion towards this part when if they all of a sudden start verbally abusing us. And of course it's important that you set limits and boundaries in your practice around that. and realize that this is not the same as a non-dissociative client getting mad at you, where the kind, which can happen too, but like, you have to navigate your own safety and your own clinical boundaries in a way that also is honoring of what this perpetrator interject needs to do and how you need to work with them to make progress. So it's complicated. So yeah, to work with a perpetrator interject, you ideally will have what's called direct access to it, right? You're talking directly to that perpetrator part. You have drawn them out. They are fronting, if you want to call it that, in the system. Like, you're not talking through the client to the perpetrator interject. You're not saying, hey, can you ask the bad man or the shadow or the monster, however the client refers to the interject, or, the father part or whatever, what they think about this. You might need to do that at first, but ideally you're going to get direct access to this part. You're going to talk to, like, the part will be the part of the client that you are interacting with. You're going to make the most progress this way. And this is going to help you establish some trust with the perpetrator, between you and the perpetrator and the introject, so that the introject will eventually, one, kind of let its role expand and shift to a more, not productive, but, adaptive, I guess maybe is the word I'm looking for. One, but so they'll also decide to allow processing to advance, to get on board with whatever processing needs to happen that they are trying to protect the system from facing, from looking at, from re-experiencing, right? Something else that's interesting is Paulson recommends not talking about perpetrator necessarily right away to the client, because the client may have loyalty to that perpetrator or to that aggressor, right? So use the language the client uses. That's just something to think about, that they might be like, well, that's my father and I love him. He's not a perpetrator, he's my father. Okay. All right. So maybe that's not the word we're going to use. And it's also really important to always remember that this is not, the introject is not the father or whoever. It is the part of the self that is acting as the father. And it's actually better to talk about it like that and say, like, not, can I talk to your father, but I'd like to talk to the part of you, the father part of the self, right? Because we're always trying to help the client and the whole system remember that these are all parts of themselves. They're not external, right? So to get access, you could use the conference table technique, which I've talked about in lots of other episodes, and see if a perpetrator-like figure is there or nearby. And like I said, they're often kind of a monstrous-looking figure in some way. And then you can ask to speak to them. You can ask other ego states if they can help you access the perpetrator directly. Like, could you, let them know that I really want to talk to them and help bring them forward. You can also appeal directly to them. Like, I know you're able to hear me. I'd love to get to know you. I know you have an important job. I know how important you are and how strong you are. Would you be willing to come out and talk to me? At other times, the switch might just happen. This has happened to me a few times, and it's been intense. And it's because I got a little bit too close to something painful or projected by the introject, and they got really mad and they came out and they gave me a piece of their mind, which can be scary, like yelling and swearing at me. And honestly, that was a sign that I didn't really go about it in the best way, but we worked through it. But it was a lot. Not just yelling, but like trying to make me afraid, right? Like, they want me to feel their power. And so it's a lot. It's heavy. And, what do you do when the perpetrator does come out, right? You want to draw them out. That's what I'm saying. It's important to draw this part out. So you've done that. They're here. Yeah. What do you do now? First, stay grounded, right? Remind yourself how vital and important this work is, and that this is a part of the system. It's not, who the client is, like any part of them. It's a part of their system that has an important role. They're not something to avoid. This has to happen, right? And remember, your client might be afraid for you to encounter the introject, right? They might be worried that you're going to get hurt or abused the way the introject often abuses them internally, right? And then, of course, they have that attachment to the perpetrator, conscious or not, which also influences whether or not they want the perpetrator to meet you, right? So the client might be struggling to allow that access to happen. So it's important also, in a way that is client-centered and appropriate, to kind of explain to the system, to the client, why is this necessary? Why do we need to do this, right? And assure them like that you can handle it, that you know the importance of this work, you're gonna keep everybody safe, like all that stuff. So in the work itself, and I'm speaking very big picture, very vague here, but just trying to give you a sense of like what you might need to do. You're going to want to look at orienting the introject to present time, right? The introject is likely stuck in the past, right? And may not be aware that the client is an adult and that they are part, like they share the body with the client, right? And they need to know that for you to move forward, right? Because that obviously the introject needs to know they are not the father, right? They are the father part of the self. And that has very different implications, right? So you need to orient them to present time, right? You can use the news. Okay, let's look up something online and see what the date is, right? A smartphone. You can show them like, look, the date's right on here. A driver's license. You can use a mirror. Look in the mirror. Does that look like how old does that person look? Or does that look like who you think you look like? Right? I'm making it sound simple. This can be very jarring, okay, for a part of the self and may take some time. I have worked with people who talk about how they have a lot of broken mirrors at their home because there's parts of them that can't, if they see a mirror, it freaks them out because they don't think that what they see is what they actually look like. So, it's not like, oh, look, oh, my driver's license says I'm 25. Oh, I'm 25. Like, it's rarely that simple, but you do need to orient them to present time. And right, the introjects is part of the self system, so do not refer to them as, you may have a client who has an abuser who's not necessarily a family member, but like is someone they saw a lot, and they have a name for them. The perpetrator is not name, it is quote, name part of self, right? It's not father, it's father part of self. So always, as the therapist, keep that in mind and bring that up to keep it in the system's awareness as well, and the perpetrator's awareness as well. Perpetrator interjects awareness as well. So orient them to present time, orient them to the fact that they share a body with the client. Appreciate the introject, right? Honor their power and importance. Do not demean them. Don't tell them that you're not afraid of them, right? Thank them for holding that perpetrator energy so it didn't leak out and infect the whole system, right? Because that's part of what they're doing, right? They are going to hold all of that so that other parts don't have to experience that. Thank them for helping to keep the system sort of in line and safe, even if the ways that the perpetrator interjects do that doesn't always keep the person safe, right? Perpetrators can come across as really verbally hostile and abusive, and the client might report that to be what they hear inside. And if you draw them out, that might be how they are towards you at first. But deep down, they're holding this perpetrator energy to keep the client safe, and they really believe that's what they're doing, right? And how are they keeping the client safe? Well, if this perpetrator interject is saying, you're bad, you're worthless, like you shouldn't even be here, right? If they have that fear, they're not going to, quote, act out in ways that would require them to be punished. Like if someone was sexually abused frequently, right, by a family member. And if the perpetrator keeps them afraid enough, then maybe they won't do the thing that triggers the abuser to whatever, and none of this is reality based exactly, but that is often the belief system that's going on. So yeah, the introject truly does have an important job. Like every part has a purpose. We know that, right? But here's the purpose of this part. And often the perpetrator holds some of the loyalty to those attachment figures, right? Like, well, they kind of like the father part of the self, like you don't hate the father part of the self or whatever. You hold on to some of that love. And, we know that it's vital for a child's development to have some attachment to their caregivers, even when that caregiver is, I don't know if vital to their development is exactly what I mean, but like it's something that happens. It's going to happen, right? Even when it's chaotic and unsafe, children have that attachment to a caregiver, even when that, like in 99% of the time, I don't even know what percent of the time, no matter how bad the stuff is, there's still some of that loyalty to the aggressor, right? And the perpetrator holds that. So we have to honor that too. So you're going to orient the introject to present time. You're going to appreciate them, right? You're going to let the introject know that they don't have to live a life the way that they've been living, right? That they have other ways that they can contribute and be important to the system. We're not getting rid of them, right? All that stored energy that they have can be released, some can be shared to help the system be overall more empowered with that, use that power that we are telling them is so great that they have. Like, they're so valuable, and we can, you can always be protective again if you have to be, right? We know you can do that, and that's so important. And maybe you'd like to just spread that responsibility out a little bit. Maybe you can help the whole system be, conscientious and have good judgment, right? So sort of like some of those things that maybe if we dial down a lot of that perpetrator energy is what's underneath that, right? And you can also let them know that maybe they would like to rest. Wouldn't they like a chance to rest? They don't have to just hold all that fierce, protective, toxic energy all the time. They can transform that energy, and they can share that energy, and they can rest some. So this, of course, makes this all sound very smooth, very easy, and it is not. It's bumpy, it's overwhelming, it's scary for you and for your client, and every system and every introject is different, right? These are just some generic guidelines to get you thinking about what this kind of work might look like and how to sort of orient yourself towards what needs to happen. This is definitely, like I said, an area in which it's great to get extra consultation and support, and you should. But it's such an important topic that I wanted to give you all something of an introduction just to sort of think about it, right? Because I also know it's not necessarily an area in which everyone has training and expertise. And I think it's really important that there are more clinicians out there who are developing, the skills to work with this kind of complex dissociation. And EMDR therapists who are going to be working in an intensive format are more likely maybe to encounter some of this. And so I want you to feel like you have at least some framework for understanding what's going on. So yeah, my little clinical rant. This is a topic I'm very interested in, dissociation, as many of you know. And so I just thought, hey, I've never really talked about this piece of it very much. And I know it's a piece that can feel particularly scary. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of a framework to think about. So thank you to all of you for listening, as always. This episode comes out on Christmas Eve, and so I am grateful to all of you at the end of the year for listening and supporting this podcast. I'm so grateful to you all for keeping me going when the load feels heavy with the podcast. The messages of support and appreciation I get about the podcast really motivate me to keep turning these episodes out. And if 2026 is looking like the year that you finally go all in on intensives, you're like, I'm doing it. Today is the last day for my holiday sale on my on-demand video course, the EMDR Intensive Practice Formula. The sale ends at 11:59 tonight, Eastern Standard Time. Today's the last day you can get in on that sale. It's a 6-module, 12-hour on-demand video course covering everything you need to know about marketing, pricing, booking, and carrying out clinical skills, including dissociation stuff. There's a lot more about that in the course. How to carry out those lucrative and transformational EMDR intensives. If you want to buy the course, today's the last day you can get the $100 off. Use the code holiday10 at checkout, capital H, capital O, capital L, capital I, capital D, capital A, capital Y, number 10, holiday10 at checkout, $100 off the price of the course. Don't miss out if that sounds like something that you think could really help you transform your practice in 2026 and bring tremendous healing to so many people. So wishing you all peaceful holidays and a warm and bright new year. And I will talk to you again next week. Take good care, everyone.